Countdown begins. Alrighty. We are live on the podcast. Wow, it took us almost 5 years and I can actually say that instead of doing my weird little awkward intro that I used to do.
You used to do an awkward
Well,
intro.
well, it was like, remember I would say, and we're live. Well, not really live, but.
No. And wait.
Well, we're recording, but now we're actually live and recording. Oh, Jesus.
Oh. Make sure my microphone here is set up. Looks like it.
Yeah, you're Gucci.
Cool.
Alrighty. So, Joe, we got ourselves another book podcast. This one is yours to spearhead. So
Today we have Icarus Fallen by Chantal Delsol, French philosopher. We teased this on last week's live stream, but we did the live stream Thursday. Right? Thursday, or was it Wednesday?
Wednesday, actually. Wednesday.
Which went great. And we talked about cyberpunk again, but this time with Jordan, and kind of dystopian future societies and what the opposite of that might be, what aspirational goals we might aim towards instead of where all of our sci-fi at the moment seems to be aiming at, which is all the negative things.
Yeah. How do things go sideways?
Yeah, we as a society at the moment, when we imagine the future, everything that pops up is negative, and that's a problem because the problem is not in doing that. The problem is what it signifies, which is that we think things are going very badly, and we struggle to believe that we can have a future that's going to be amazing or beautiful or worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess the question for this podcast is, why is it that we struggle to see a positive future? And beyond just, this is going to take a philosophical look, so it's beyond just that COVID just happened and that's a practical problem, or our politics are in shambles, that's a practical problem, and that there's division in our society, which is, again, a practical problem. But what's the underlying reason for all? Why? What connects those things? Why are they all byproducts of something else? What is that something? And so on. Which is what Chantal Delsol gets at in this philosophy book.
When was this written? Because as I was writing the description and stuff, it's a translation, if I'm remembering correctly.
It is. Let's see. When? It's a good question. I don't remember. 2003.
Okay, so it's more modern than I anticipated, but they're obviously French, so that's why there was a translation needed.
Yeah, so she was ahead of the curve here by about 20 years. Huh. That's pretty impressive.
Very.
So what you need to understand about this book, here's kind of a brief overlay, is that what the reason for the name Icarus Fallen is because it's a reference to the Greek myth of Icarus, right? Icarus and his father Daedalus escape a castle using wax wings, and they fly, and his son, right, Icarus, is so enthused, so excited, so overconfident that he flies higher and higher and higher, and then gets too close to the sun, and his wax wings melt, and he comes crashing to the ground and dies. Now, Del Sol imagines that we, as a civilization, are in a place where the same place that Icarus would have been had he survived the fall. So had he striven to great heights, achieved amazing things, only to come crashing back down to earth and hitting rock bottom pretty hard, but surviving, right? What would that be like? What is his mindset? What happens?
How do you pick yourself up after a fall like that?
Yeah, and this is something that's a nice analogy for where we are. So I'm actually not going to start with Del Sol. I'm actually going to start with a piece of Nietzsche. So
Well, that's coming full circle because I think we started these live streams with a Nietzsche
yeah, we
piece.
did.
So go watch that one too if you haven't watched that one.
So some number of readers will have heard the idea that God is dead. Listeners will know the idea that God is dead. That came from Nietzsche. And this is actually the passage. I think it's from Thus Spake There Zarathustra, which is kind of a crazy novel almost that Nietzsche wrote that's very mythical and strange.
Weird.
Where this began. Yeah, less written like an analytic philosophy book and more like a kind of psychedelic trip or like a
Wild
vision experience. In which he comes to the conclusion that the belief systems that we once relied on, so Christianity, can't survive the rational inquiry and rational sort of dissection that modernism, the Enlightenment, and so on brought. And this is where this begins, where this problem in our modern society begins, is with the death of God, right? So it's not that God is dead, we don't believe in God. It wasn't some triumphant, like, haha, we've killed God with our rationality. Right. It was,
some like atheist call to arms, right? Because so like just for context, for me, I'm sure a lot of listeners had similar experiences. I think back probably around like high school or so is when I first heard that quote, and I heard it like in context with like an atheist kind of manifesto of the world. But then like I think it was probably as I entered college that I heard the actual full quote of that, which is God is dead and we have killed him. And I was like, well, that's really fucking bad to like miss. Like I feel like that second half of that quote is really important. Like it really changes the context of what he was saying when you actually put the full sentence there.
Yeah, and I heard it the same way. So there's a evangelical film that came out, I don't know how long ago.
That makes more sense now.
That came out that was called God is Not Dead. And I never fucking watched this. It looked like it's like all evangelical films, they're horrible and they're propaganda and it's boring.
They're like borderline conspiracy theory films.
It's just lame. And the idea that he tends to take the idea that God is dead as the assertion that God has been disproven and that there's no reason to believe in God anymore, or that the Western world no longer believes in God anymore, and that's somehow a good thing or whatever. So they react to it defensively and they say, I still believe in God, therefore God is not dead. But that doesn't even, and so they're having this triumphant declaration of faith, either through that film as propaganda or themselves in defiance of this idea, their misconstrual of what Nietzsche was talking about. But when you realize that what Nietzsche's actually talking about, it's stupid. It is stupid to react in that way, to make a movie God is Not Dead, because it's like you're so misunderstanding the philosophy that if you understood it properly, that would under no circumstances be your response. You're not dealing with the issue. In fact, your belief in this evangelical, especially fundamentalist evangelical God, that kind of sees God as this weird, like man in the sky, this object. In reality, it's a strange worldview. That just saying that you believe in that doesn't mean that your God can survive the rational onslaught that's already come, right? In some sense, you've held out long past your time. And whatever I found that many evangelical beliefs are predicated on ignorance, that they just don't, the arguments and counter arguments that come up are just do not understand the situation that they're in. They just don't get it. And even the apologists like William Lane Craig and these people who make rational arguments for the existence of God are playing silly games where they'll say things like, now I don't know if William Lane Craig did this, but I've heard this before, so I'm not attributing it to him, just some apologist would say things like, the world is 6,000 years old and scientists can't tell us otherwise because radiocarbon dating only spans like 1,000 to 2,000 years. So they couldn't really tell us that it's that old, that it's billions of years old. And they'll make this argument to their congregations, presumably to strengthen the faith of their congregation. But that is a lie. Not in that radiocarbon dating doesn't have some window of time in which it operates, but that there are other isotopes that you can use that have different windows of operation. And so they go back billions of years. And so you can look at, oh, this one decays over, takes a billion, or so. This covers the 2 billion year old window to 1 billion years old. And this one covers this and this one, and they all overlap. And you can use all these different isotopes to get a full picture of the age of some fossil that you found. And the idea that because radiocarbon dating has a small window that it operates in means that the Earth is in fact 6,000 years old, and you can believe that if you're a Christian, is asinine. And it's so asinine that it suggests that the apologists are either staggeringly ignorant about the science or aware and actively lying to their congregations in order to boost their faith or something. Okay, so this is either a malicious level of deceit, hostility, protecting them against truth, mind you. And if God is truth, right? God is the true path or whatever. Well, then you've just tripped an incoherence, and that is a contradiction to say that God reveals to us the truth, or has the truth, or determines the truth. And then when we discover the truth, somehow that's against God. But you have to lie to provide an alternate truth from the one that the science has come up with. And apparently you're on God's side. So you're the liar, but apparently you're on God's side here. So that's malicious, or it's just frighteningly ignorant. But this is the way that world tends to view Nietzsche. Understand the entire idea that God is dead, and so that's worth noting, so that we can address that right now, right here. That what Nietzsche is talking about when he says God is dead is not the idea that God never existed. He's not even making a metaphysical claim there. He's making a claim about the fact that that the way in which we were our belief systems construed the world, and the way in which we thought that they were construing the world and our understanding of them, doesn't square with the science and the rationality, the philosophy, and so on. Okay, so here's this portion. I'm going to read Nietzsche now, and we can hear this straight from the horse's mouth. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, I seek God. I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, emigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Where is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we enchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing As yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God, do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers?
Damn.
Right.
Well, I get why you started there. I mean, the first thought that popped in my brain, which is very contemporary, but it almost makes even more sense why we're turning to things like a multiverse or a, you know, plurality of ways of being as a way to figure out what direction we're going, right? That's, he said, we've unchained ourselves from our sun, you know,
Yeah.
and that, in my sense, it's like, well, the sun is the anchor point for which we, you know, the sun rises and sets in the east or whatever, you know. It's like it gives you that natural cadence of life, right? And if you pull that pin, you drift into any direction you so choose,
Right. And I like the
or not
idea
even
that
you choose.
I like when he talks about are we going up or down or backwards? What does
Right.
that even mean? Like, where's up in space? You know, if you're floating in the vacuum, it's like, what is this reference we're talking about? It's like
Yeah.
God and the Christian morality had been for Europe and for so long. In fact, all of human history has one God or another. It's
Yep.
suggesting what's higher, what's the highest ideal and virtues and these things. And it provided for people an orientation, a sense of where we should be going, where not to go, how to move, right? It was a compass for life and all this. But now it's annihilated.
The higher order to aim for.
And when that's gone, one's left to wonder, where do you go? What do you do? And so nihilism is immediately, and not just nihilism in that you believe that there's no meaning to live for exactly, but it isn't clear. It's in the emptiness of everything that that everything in some sense has no ultimate meaning, and so there's kind of no point to do anything. That turning left is equally as good as turning right. There's no reference. You can move up, you can move down
at all.
Right, these things mean nothing anymore. It's all disoriented. Okay. So now we're going to go to Delsol, and that's kind of a good primer because you get a sense of where she's beginning. So we're going to talk about a small part in the book. It's actually chapter 10, and she's talking about the rejection of worldviews. So one short quote: historically, most governments have maintained a conception of social happiness that they have inherited from religion, or more generally from culture. Okay. So the idea there is that we're talking more about politics in a way that Nietzsche didn't in what we read, right? And that here it's actually, we're going to talk about what's going on with the political world. And that our governments don't actually know what to aim at. Because in the same way that we're all disoriented from the loss of God, governments themselves are disoriented, and that the people in them don't really know what to do. And they used to look at ideals. The ideals that would draw them forward were religious ideals. And without a common religion here to guide us, then like that's it. We don't know where to move, right? So even the idea of a good life, well, good, define good without being religious. Like, so this is a strange problem. And none of what we're actually going to talk about here, we should just say, is a statement about whether or not God exists. It's beyond the point. It's a question.
I was going to say it doesn't feel like that's what even Nietzsche was getting at. He was just using God as a kind of a shorthand, as the closest metaphor.
Well, he's right to use God even in a more literal sense, in that he's talking about the death of religion, and he's talking about the religion. But we're not talking here about whether or not God does or does not exist. We're talking about the consequences of a culture of losing the belief in a God
Yeah,
and what that results in. So
it's more
you could all
abstract
lose your
than
belief hypothetically in God, and God can still exist, right?
yeah.
Or not, or you could have belief in God and God doesn't exist. It doesn't really matter. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about God is dead, right? Our religious systems have failed and they don't withstand the rational inquiry and criticism that's happened over the last 100 years. They just didn't, actually, like really 500 years, even longer, but that has undermined them. Western culture in general has lost its sense and a belief, specifically in Christianity. Though I know there's some polls that show that there's been an increased belief in spirits and superstition and UFOs and stuff at the same time.
Yep. It's spiritual but non-religious is the category.
Right, because you can't actually kill the impulse for God. It's an evolved one. So
You'll see a new religion probably.
yeah, and it's not even that we evolved to believe in God, I don't think. I think it's more like it's a very strange problem. It's more like oh man, God is and we evolved around it. But
Ooh, that
what
gets you
I
down spooky territory.
yeah, it's very weird. It depends on, and I don't, that's a rabbit hole because even what I mean by God in that is a complicated thing.
The tangent for another podcast.
Yeah, we're gonna leave that one alone. But anyway, so God is dead. We didn't annihilate the desire for God because that's an evolved thing. So you get superstitions, even though people have dropped formal religion entirely. The consequence of dropping these formal religions are as follows. As Delsol just noted, governments don't have a sense of what a good life is. Right? She carries on. Modern pluralistic democracy inaugurates a new way of looking at things. It presupposes that happiness is subject to controversy, is always defined by a particular belief system, and that it is based on a subjective value system. It postulates that there is no objective conception of social happiness, and that because of this, no government can legitimately adopt a particular conception of the good, in the sense that tax, education, or immigration policy reflects a particular way of understanding collective or individual happiness. The common path, the common aim, the value that was given to us by religion is gone. What that thing was good, whatever that value was good. Governments don't have a single good anymore. In their democratic systems, instead emerge a bunch of different goods, none of which are objective in the way that we thought about God being an objective fact outside of, which is, say, mind independent, that it's not dependent on me believing in him to exist. So there's no good in an objective sense. It's just all subjective goods. And they're all going to debate endlessly about which one gets to be in power at any given time. Yep. Right. So it's all blurred apart. And so there's not a good tax or education or immigration policy. It's just a bunch of opinions about what is a good education policy without any objective reference to compare it to. So that's part of where we're at. And you can see that everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's like every time we get in these debates, people, if you try to say that there's something objectively good, in fact, just the idea of objective truth right now is out of vogue.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember there was this is actually one of the TED Talks where I've kind of stopped listening to they used to do TED radio hours, which are basically like podcasts around a theme. And they would take different interviews from different people around certain themes. And they basically did a objectivism versus subjectivism. But then they ended the podcast kind of positing that subjectivism was the right way to look at the world. And I was like, you're not supposed to do that.
Right.
Like you're supposed to be right. Like you're supposed to be advocating for the ideas, not for what is the right idea. Because like you said, it goes out of vogue. Like everything ebbs and flows with time. But it's like, I also don't think that like there are objective things, like We can't deny that.
Yeah. Well, people will. They'll deny that. That they'll even the idea that that anything is not a social construct is out of favor. That people will say things like, "What do you mean?" They'll say your truth, right? This is great,
That's
right?
very common.
Right, like that's nails this right on the head. It's like people won't say the truth; they'll say, follow your truth or whatever.
Preach your truth.
And it's not that people don't have experiences, right? Because the Steelman version of that would be that every person is presumably conscious, and they have a conscious experience that I don't have direct access to and never will. And so I can't exactly tell them what their experience was. And so they get to say that what their truth is whatever it is they happen to be experiencing. The thing that people do, though, is not say that. Is that what they say? What they take that and then they say, because you don't have access to my conscious experience, my lived experience, then you can't tell me that my interpretation of my lived experience is invalid. But the obvious reason why that's wrong is narcissists. Narcissists believe they are better than everyone. They believe that. They have an inflated ego. They think they're amazing, that they can do no wrong and all this, right? That's their model of their experience. And they even experience that to some degree. Does that make it true? Does that mean they really are better than all these people?
In 99% of situations that the narcissist puts other people in, no.
Does that mean they can do no wrong in the way they seem to think that they can do no wrong? No, they're deluded.
Yeah.
They are deluded. And that is an obvious case against this idea of pure subjectivity.
And just thinking about this right now, wouldn't that make therapy impossible? Like the whole idea of having someone be a therapist, being able to help you sort through your problems, because wouldn't that therapist need to live with you 24/7 to be able to have any sort of insight?
They can't even do that because they still wouldn't have access to your direct experience.
Okay.
And because they're saying that because I only have direct access to my experience, no one else does, and my model of my direct experience is somehow inherently valid as a result, actually no reason for the therapist to do anything other than give you exactly what you want. And so you have the APA suggesting affirmative treatment, affirmative care for transgendered individuals. And the idea that a therapist is there to affirm or deny anything it's malpractice. But the idea that a therapist might suggest something or say, let's hold up, like you're making this, you are self-diagnosing, let's hold off on that until we figure out something in the future, doesn't make sense, because once I have a model of me being transgendered and I tell somebody that, they have no means by which to argue that I'm not. It's all this subjectivity thing. Once I believe that I am, then I am, as far as these people are concerned. But again, this is the narcissism problem. Once I'm a narcissist and I believe that I'm better than anyone, well, then I just am, right? So, if you want to grant the idea that the APA and the therapist should be doing affirmative therapy or affirmative treatment and taking the self-diagnoses of their patients seriously, then you have to agree with the idea that narcissists are actually better than you.
Weird.
So
the thought that comes up too is does that mean, I don't know if there's any studies on this, but has there been like a rise in narcissistic behavior since the 20th century? Because that was the one thing that comes to mind, but the other part is like it seems like we've taken this like the hyper individualistic culture that America was kind of founded on or like grew into, and just kind of turned this thing a little too far. Like we've ratcheted up that intensity just a little too much.
I don't know about research about an increase in narcissism. I have no idea. I mean, the internet seems to suggest that everyone's a narcissist now.
But the internet never lies, right?
But I don't know. Maybe
I'm
it's
just curious more than
right.
anything else.
There certainly is a feeling that we've gone too far on the individualism front. This idea that it's become so individualistic that it's become solipsistic and narcissistic and so on. So I kind of get the sentiment. I'm just not sure about any research.
So I just did a quick little research on NIH Library. Oh, this is East and West Germany in 2018. But it says narcissism in the modern Western societies, and this has been referred to as a narcissism epidemic. The endorsement rate of this statement, I am an important person, has increased from 12% in 1963 to 77 to 80% in 1992 in adolescence.
Well, that's nice.
So that's a huge increase in like 20 years.
Yeah, well, some of it could be better diagnostic tools.
Right, yeah. How good were the studies back then in the 60s?
What was the age group?
It said adolescence. It doesn't say age group.
Well, teens are kind of narcissistic anyway, right?
Right. So they analyzed narcissistic language, such as me more frequently than we and us, such as I am the greatest, more self-focused song lyrics, stronger orientation toward frame and TV shows, stuff like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Some of the language stuff could be depression, not narcissism. So there's like poets that committed suicide used the word I, like self-referential language, more often than those that did not. And that there's some suggestion that when people get depressed, they become very focused on themselves. And that's not to say that they're like, that they are narcissistic or selfish exactly. It might just be that as they become depressed, that problem they become more aware of the fact that they have a problem. And so they start to talk more about, hey, I'm hurting. I need help. Like I've died, like I've located the nexus of pain and it's in me.
Okay.
Let me talk about it. So it's not necessarily self-focused. Though I know that one of the ways that people tend to improve their life quality is to serve other people. So to put your attention in others.
Yeah.
It's a complicated thing, but that's all to say that it might not necessarily be a rise in narcissism. It may be a rise in depression or a mix of both in some varying capacity. Okay. So with all that being said, we talked about the death of God so far, loss of value systems, loss of the idea of good as an objective good. Instead, we have subjective goods that in democracy are doing nothing but being argued about. And that whoever happens to win the day is the one who gets to define the good for the day. Delsol continues, through experience, we know that these global visions have often turned out to be oppressive, whether they belong to a power-wielding religion or a governing ideology. So we've seen how in the 20th century, not only did God die, in response to that, we thought that we could create heaven on earth of our own accord, that we could do it. That look at it was like there's an optimism in modernism. It was like, we can go to the moon, we can build the Panama Canal, we can create these cities that have never been made before. Look at these amazing things. Look, the whole world is our oyster. We can manipulate reality in any way that we want. We'll build heaven on earth. Watch us. And the mechanisms that we produced and the ideologies that we produced to replace God very quickly devolved into Auschwitz and the Gulag Archipelago. And so we became not only cautious or paranoid about religion and theocracy and these things, perhaps rightfully, but also ideology itself, that communism is a path to death, fascism is a path to death, religion is a path to death. Can we do anything that doesn't result in some horrible tragedy? Oh, look how amazing America is, but they had slaves. Like everything, all society and civilization seems to be just one more. Any step you take, any direction you look in, any
another
star on
star.
the horizon you want to use as a guideline is suddenly subject to this terror. And
Yeah.
no one really knows where to turn. So there's that part. 5.
It's a very
Okay,
interesting idea.
so the part that's really cool, that's interesting about that too. She talks about how she defines values as aspirational. So the idea is that the goals that we're aiming at are that our values are not so concrete. That a very concrete goal is pick up a glass of water, go to the grocery store, whatever. But values are aspirational goals. They're things like justice, and that you don't actually achieve them. You never get there. Like I go to the store and I need to buy milk. I grab that off the shelf and I bring it home, and the end. Done.
Right.
I
Yeah.
achieved it. Mission
Goal
accomplished.
accomplished.
But in pursuit of justice, the horizon recedes. It continues to move forward. You continue to go after. You continue, and you never actually get there. But they're aspirational. You're not, in some sense, meant to get there. You're meant to get further. That's what you're meant to do. Just get further than where you are now. But when we lost our values, we lost that aspirational understanding. And we now don't really know not just where to aim, but what's worth aiming at. We're scared of what to aim at.
Right.
Everything is a horror show. And we're kind of just like, where do I
It's almost
turn?
like you're paralyzed to what direction to turn, or like even with like that's why I think the uses of God in the language that you quoted from is so important, because it simplifies the how many variables, too many to comprehend, that you can take directions in your life. It's another thing. It's like, at least for me, what makes a lot of sense in this, and I hate to do it, but I feel like we bring it up in almost every podcast, but like working out is kind of like this microcosm of what it means to aspire towards something. Because early on, you can like get obsessed with a certain like kind of physique or a certain goal, like, running a mile or lifting a certain weight, whatever. But very quickly, once you hit a certain thing, you realize that if you really want to keep progressing, you're going to have to keep updating that short-term goal so that you just, or if at some point just continue to maintain, because you can't, like, you're going to just naturally plateau or just you're not a professional athlete. So you just have to keep it reasonable with what time you can put into these things. Right. Um, and so that's like a smaller example of like how to think about this, that I think what I've noticed, at least for myself, is if you can realize that everything is a work in progress all the time, it kind of takes some of the pressure off of you to like perform in the moment, or like be perfect in the moment, I guess.
Yeah. And
Or that stagnation or paralysis, I guess, of not doing anything, right?
but it also gets you like, it's not just like it saves you from the paralysis, but it also lets you understand that like you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Like you're meant to progress slowly. You're meant to get as far as you can, and you're never going to achieve the perfect thing.
Yeah.
Perfection is like the idea of grasping something finally, that you
It,
finally have this goal, but aspirations aren't concrete.
yeah.
Right? They're not meant to be.
It almost feels like life in some sense, and it sounds weird, but it's like you're creating a living masterpiece, but you're not done until you take your last breath. That's the most poetic way I can kind of put what it feels like living, without like some religious framework or something like that. Like every day you just live as best as you see fit, and then you do that until it's over. And it sounds weird, but that's kind of what it is. Like there's like it's not like wait until the end, and at least for me, it's like you until the very end, or the, when you have those moments where you reflect and you're like, well, I'm glad I have all these people that I care about in my life, right? Like I feel like that's the more tangible thing. It's not about like the money or the wealth or the things you accrue. It's the people that you brush up against that make it worth it, because it's like in those moments, it's not the simple mathematics that like our society as a modern thing likes to do with math, where it's like 1 + 1 = 2, or multiplication. It's in those moments where it's somehow 1 + 1 = 4, right? Like when you meet certain people in your life and you just get it.
Hmm.
There's like a hidden algorithm in those things that you can't explain, right? And we've kind of lost those things.
There's something about, in what I'm hearing you say, that's about, it's not like if I go to a party and I have a bunch of expectations of where the party is or what the party is going to be like and how the perfect night is going to look. And oh man, I'm so excited this person's going to be there and we're going to talk just like this. Everything's going to go according to this plan. That ruins the night.
Yeah.
That you go in there with these expectations and either you're disappointed, but often you're disappointed not because it didn't live up to your expectations, but because you tried to impose those expectations on the evening and then guaranteeing that they wouldn't exceed your expectations. You weren't present. You were trapped in your model that you wanted to have happen, right?
Yep.
And there's something about being with good friends and with good people that if you can let go of this grabbing onto your objective thing, just let it go and understand that the point is not perfection. The point is to appreciate the moment, to enjoy the moment, to be there with other people. And in that way, when you can accomplish that, when you can learn to let go, then you can find that the world had more in store for you than you could imagine.
Yeah.
That your expectations were small in comparison to what the world wanted for you in that moment.
Yeah. To quote Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates, but you never know what you're going to get.
I love chocolate, so.
I mean, you're totally right. Like and that's one thing I've noticed. It's like the least you expect of others, the better the outcome in most situations. But the other thing is to have high expectations of yourself, because those are the things you can control. Because if you go into the situations where you can actually affect the outcome and you're prepared and you've done all your homework or whatever you need to do to execute on those things, 9 times out of 10, you will succeed, whatever that means.
Yeah. If you can push yourself, if you can take yourself further, if you can understand.
Yeah.
You need kind of a vision. You need a long vision, which is, of course, something that we're
She gets
lacking.
into, I assume. Or,
That we're lacking. That Delsol is saying we're lacking. Accurate.
yeah.
Okay.
I figured she would pull that in.
So I'm going to move on.
Go ahead.
So I think this whole page is probably worth going at. There's this idea that, and this is kind of the real interesting part here when it comes to politics, it's that because there's no good, there's actually no good politics in any objective sense. It's all random and subjective. So what you have instead is that because people are looking for something objective, something hard, like a hard foundation that they can stand on, something that they can rely on to be in place of a good when we can't buy into any values, they start to look at at science as if it's an inflexible, secure thing. And they turn away from politicians and instead to something like, they're like task creators. They're not task accomplishers. They're gophers. They get you the coffee. They bring you the science, and they're just like, here you go. This is the perfect solution to this problem. We did the science. Take the science, and whatever.
It sounds like Shake the Crystal Ball, or like the Magic 8 Ball. That's what I'm thinking of. And it's like, science says, and then it's like, here's exactly what you wanted to see.
Right. Of course, both parties now will say that they're this party of science,
Right.
right? And so you hear this kind of language everywhere. And Fauci, of course, they offloaded a ton of the responsibility of dealing with the pandemic onto Fauci, as if he was science, which is what he claimed, for one.
Yeah.
On multiple occasions, he said that criticizing, and he talked in the third person. It was so ridiculous. It's like, did you, like, Shakespeare had Julius Caesar talk in the third person to make him sound like an asshole. Okay. Really, to make him sound arrogant and gaudy. And
So
of course,
note to self:
Fauci,
don't ever talk in third person.
yeah. And so Fauci literally said, criticizing Dr. Fauci really is criticizing science, which is bullshit. That is bullshit. If you think that, you are not a scientist. Science is not a stable thing. It is constantly in debate within itself. And it is evolving and will slowly but surely approximate truths, but science itself is aspirational and not a clear goal. But they'll offload the responsibility of statesmanship, which would be taking the facts that even science provides you and the facts on the ground and employing wisdom, seeing how they serve the values that we hold as a society. But the statesman is dead. The statesman is a politician who governs with these values in mind. But when there are no values, there can be no statesman, and instead there are scientists who take on the responsibility of that should be a statesman in governing and directing and moving the ship in the right direction.
Right.
And so she calls this like a technocracy, that everything's just a technical problem. It's, we offload the responsibilities of statesmanship onto all of these people who, instead of aiming at goals, they're just fixers of little problems. They run around, they fix all these little problems. They don't actually aim at anything. They just put fires out everywhere. They're not moving us in the right direction. They're not moving at all. They're just putting out the fires, and that's it. Which, me, when I read this, I was like, oh yeah, that's totally what we're doing.
Dude, know what's scary about this? So I've been listening to a ton of hardcore history, which is probably a surprise to nobody. But back probably like a couple months ago, I listened to like the downfall of the Roman Empire. And this is basically, I mean, the downfall of Roman Empire, I say that as if it happened like over a weekend, and it really didn't. It happened over like 100 years. But basically, this is what happens: is like you basically start out with strong rulers for most civilizations who understand the civilization they created and the great experiment of the civilization, and things are great, and there's a golden age after a certain period of time. But then after a while, the golden age ends, and then you start getting rulers who don't remember or understand the underlying statesmanship or the philosophy of what they actually created. And you can actually see this in contemporary times, in modern times, where you have people who start a company, and the people who start that company really get it and really know how to shepherd it into a golden era of growth and innovation. But then after a period of time, someone joins that company who takes over, and then after multiple leaders who don't understand anymore, they're just kind of running it in steady state. And after some steady state, once an actual struggle happens, that company begins to collapse and corrode. And I think states go through the same period of expansion and contraction. And I think it's very apparent where we're kind of heading towards, if we don't get our heads out of our asses, to put it not so lightly.
Right. We did a live stream on the book Immoderate Greatness about how civilizations collapse. And it's the same. He said the same thing in that book. It's just, there's a period of people who create the state and they put in the work, and they're some hard people and they make it happen, but they have a philosophy. They understand why it's necessary because they saw the world before that state was there. And they're like, whoa, maybe not that. Let's have a state. And so they put in all that work, and there's a generation that respects this and understands it, and so on. But as time goes on, you get more and more removed, generation from generation, from that initial understanding, and it gets watered down and watered down, and then everything starts to dissolve.
Yeah.
And that's something like what we have playing now. and that's evident in our politics. It's like we struggle. Our politicians don't talk about values. They give it's pablum. And even the idea of talking about values feels like antiquated. It feels antiquated. And so like or they would come up and the only person who would talk about values would be an evangelical Christian talking about traditional values in Idaho to get elected. And it's not even clear that that person actually gives a flying fuck about values. They care about getting elected, and they're speaking what they think the population wants to hear. So it's propaganda.
Yep.
It's just political conniving and BS. So it's like when you hear it, it seems as if it's either totally antiquated and makes no sense, or that it's just a political ploy, riling up the base.
Yeah. I mean, even right now, like we just went through our midterm elections, and it's like, it feels like the most important thing isn't like the actual issues. It's just who has more seats in the respective places in our government, which is like, what? Like it seems like it's going to be so even that it's just going to be both sides are just going to stonewall each other from doing anything of value. Like no side wants to talk to each other. And it's like, what is, like, have they forgotten why they exist? It's not about like winning one side or the other. They're part of the same country. At least that's the way I see it.
But there's no unifying thing. There's no
right.
A value is a unifying aspirational goal. It gets us all pointing in the same direction, moving in the same direction at a thing that we may never grasp, but in pursuing it, we get further down the road than we would have otherwise.
Yeah.
But when that's gone, when that's just poof, that's just gone, everybody's all scattered to the winds, and nobody can even talk about what direction we should be moving in. They start babble. They all start speak. It all comes crashing down, and then everybody starts speaking a different language, right? And that's what the left and the right, they speak a different language.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I hadn't considered it that way, but man, you're totally spot on with that one.
That's what the story of the Tower of Babel is about, the collapse of a civilization. That what happens is that the structure that they had built crashes down, right? That whole story is a story about a bunch of people getting together, and they decide that they're going to make a tower to reach heaven, right? So they're aiming up at something. They're trying to do that, but they're kind of hubristic, like Icarus, right? Yeah. They get too high, and then the whole thing comes crashing down. And what happens when the whole thing crashes down? Everybody starts speaking a different language. And mythologically, if you just read that like it's literal, you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is some crazy shit that was just designed to explain why there are different languages in the world, which it is in part. But it's also, if you look at it mythologically and symbolically, it's trying to tell you that when a civilization is collapsing, nobody can hear each other.
Everyone just talks past each other.
Different language. And that's because the reason they're speaking a different language is because I'm reasserting a new value to replace the one that we've just lost, and you're reasserting a different one. And so I'm orienting in one direction, and you're orienting in another direction. And all of my language and thinking and everything gets organized around how to move that way. And then you're trying to, in all your organization, trying to move that way. And when I start talking about, I'll even use the same word that you're using, but I'm using it in reference to something that's within my framework, ordered underneath a different goal. And you'll use the same word in your framework, oriented against a different goal. And so we won't even use the same word in the same way. And we will talk right past each other all of the time.
Yeah.
And then I'll criticize you on my terms. So you'll say that same word that I just used, and I don't understand that you're using it in a different way, but I'll use the word then. I'll say that, oh, you're such an idiot. You said that that word means this. Haha, you're so stupid or something. Or why would you think that this would result in this? That's so dumb. But I don't even understand that you're not playing the same game, that you don't mean it the way I mean it. And that's just all that the left and the right does. They just
Right. Yeah.
they just talk past each other. They don't understand that they're speaking a different language. They don't understand that they have different values and different goals. And they criticize each other on their own terms without ever understanding what the other person is even saying. They don't know what the other person's fucking saying.
Man, it's so nuts, right? Because when you say you're talking different languages, most people assume like actual literal languages, right? But it doesn't need to be that. It's just like it's just a dialect change or a few select words that carry outsized weight within conversation.
Right.
And then
Here's an example. In the South, if somebody says "bless your heart," okay, that means a very different thing in the South than it means in the North. In the North, it's a nice thing. You don't hear it very often, but somebody would be like, "Bless your heart." Like it's kind of maybe a little quaint, but like it's nice in some sense.
Yeah.
In the South, it's an insult. It's you're an idiot. Oh, you're just stupid.
You're just a little special.
Right. So you can see how people could have misconstruals talking past each other on that thing, right? If a Northerner says to a Southerner in the way that the Northerner means it, bless your heart, and the Southerner starts getting angry, then the Northerner's confused, and the Southerner doesn't understand, is freaked out, and the Southerner doesn't understand that they misconstrued this whole thing, right? It's like a sitcom. They're talking past each other.
Yeah.
But it's the same. It's how different dialects actually evolve, is that you isolate groups of people who came from the same language background for long enough, and things and their values change a little bit as they're to compensate for their differences in environment. And then they stay different and they just drift. The language just drifts, and it turns from the same language to a kind of different dialect of the same language to suddenly I can't understand that Scotsman. I didn't understand a word that came out of his mouth, but apparently he's speaking English until it's an entirely different language.
Yeah.
And they just drift apart.
Yeah. It's just divergent.
And that's what we're doing. We're becoming different nations.
The only thing that's weird about it, though, is before the limitation was geography, right? Like once you separated people from a geographic sense, then it would do that. But now we've added this new thing called the internet, and it's like ramping up with this rate of change, or I don't even know what you call it, iteration within subcultures. And now it's, you know, you're seeing it, and we kind of talked about, before we hit record, we were talking about Twitter, and I remember having like this thought about like the analogy of like why certain things change at certain rates, or why there's like these like enclaves of things, and it's kind of like basically a chemistry problem, where if you imagine a molecule inside of an enclosure, right? Like if you have a big room and you only have a certain, like a small number of molecules of gas like floating around, there's not going to be a lot of interaction between those things, right? And so my analogy started with like cities versus like urban versus rural, right? So in rural places, the rate of change is slower because there's just less people, less density. So there's less chances for people to interact and cause tensions that need to be worked out. So then there's less progress in those domains, right? But then you go to a city and all of a sudden that rate of change gets ramped way the hell up, because you just, the random chance of you bumping into someone and there being issues that need to get worked out, or a system needs to be created to make sure there's no, you know, you flatten these things out, make sure everything's hunky dory, that you just take that container and shrink it way down.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing that played out now with the internet, where you're taking the geographical space between the rural people and the urban people, and you're putting them right next to each other, and you're saying you have to like each other and figure each other out.
I think it's not just that now we have an insane amount of access to each other. We also are free from the limiting aspect of our geography. Yeah. That if if I live in a certain area and that certain area has people around me that don't necessarily agree with me, well, what am I going to do? Go find someone that thinks just like me? No, because I can't move. I'm stuck in the small town, whatever it happens to be. We have to work out our differences. We have to talk, and that
Yeah,
actually
you're right.
limits us. We act as regulators for each other. Because if you're liberal and I'm conservative, but we're going to have to see each other every day, and we might talk politics. Well, either you learn just, it's fine. We don't have to talk politics or religion or money or whatever the other things you're
You'll
not
talk sports instead.
right. We find something else. Or you learn how to talk in such a way that you can continue to have that kind of a conversation over a long period of time, which means you have to be respectful, right? And listen and care and understand that I'm going to meet this person again. I would like for us to be on good terms going forward, right?
Mm.
And so that allows us to limit. So I might realize that my crazy beliefs, having been exposed to your beliefs, are actually not. You're acting as a regulator for me. I don't go off and spin into crazy town because you get to be like, whoa, hold up a second here. There are the moon is not flat or conspiracy theory or the earth is not flat. Let's dial it down a second. But the moment
base on the dark side of the moon, what?
Right. The moment you annihilate geography, right, you abstract everybody out of it, then a bunch of things happen. One, I can go to a digital geography where there are no people left to regulate me. I'm only surrounded by people who think exactly like I think. And there's a dual problem in that they don't regulate me from going into crazy town, but they also encourage me to go in the same direction that they're going. And we escalate each other. There's positive reinforcement happening. So it's simultaneously no one's holding you back and you're being encouraged to go farther the moment you get there. And then the other thing, there's more to it than that, but we'll leave it at that. That's one big piece.
I mean, the destruction of the local community. I mean, I didn't even consider that initially, but that makes total sense, right? Because even still, like say it's a family that's across the street from you or whatever, right? Just for sake of example, even if you don't really want to like bridge that gap for whatever reason, right? Like that person just annoys you or rubs you the wrong way. But for instance, what if your friend or significant other, whoever it might be, is friends with like someone related to that person, and you're still going to be around that person, even if you don't choose to be around that person, right? It is in your best interest to just figure it out because you're still going to have proximity to this person, and it's better to be civil because you don't want to look like an ass in front of people that are important to you. And the same is true vice versa, right? Like say you break this down another level, like it's like a school function for children or something, right? Like you still want to be civil just for the sake of the children so that you can just go to some softball game or whatever it is, some function, so that your children have a stable community, right? Like, but because of the way that the modern world works is that like sense of community has all but evaporated unless you go and seek it out for yourself in specialized formats. I mean, religion was the big one when I was little, but like
we talked about the problems with that now.
I know, right? Like that's what I say. When I was little, it was religion, but like even like school stuff, it really didn't kind of do it very much. I think nowadays my thinking in this scenario would be signing up for like a specialized gym, like a Muay Thai or BJJ gym would be like my first attempt to foster a community.
Yeah. And right, you mentioned that like you're going to have to behave in such a way that you can tolerate other people, right? You can continue to have a relationship as you continue to be around them, right? Foster friendships and such. And that requires you to act like a decent, caring, normal human being. Right. But okay, so here's what psychopaths do. So people think that like psychopaths rise up the corporate ladder and they get there and everything's great. But they can't, because what really happens is that they screw everyone over. No one forgets it because who would? And they have to move. So psychopaths go take advantage of people until they get found out, and then they run out of town and they go to the next place, and then they screw a bunch of people until they're run out of town. And
they're
they
agents of chaos.
Right. So they just have to hop around all the time in order to avoid their reputation, well, getting ahead of them, right?
Wow.
That's what the internet is making people do. We're behaving like psychopaths because we're not sitting down in one place and treating people in a way that allows for that long-term relationship to continue and foster. Because we don't have to do that, because we can keep hopping around digital communities and our reputation doesn't follow us anywhere, we can go to a place, treat everyone like shit until it goes to shit, hop to a new digital community, and then a new one, and then a new one, and then a new one. And you never have to leave your home because you're just on the internet. So
Yeah.
you can go to a community where nobody stops you from acting like a crazy person. They incentivize you to go become more and more extreme because they're agreeing with you in that positive reinforcement. And you have the opportunity to act like a psychopath. And this is super evident in the dating apps.
Oh yeah.
Where all you do is hop on Tinder, you bang somebody, and then you ghost them. Which is the opposite of how, in the most intimate realm of human relationship, you are treating them like trash. With no desire, it's without any intent to stick around and maintain that relationship despite the intimacy you just engaged in.
It's like there's no negative repercussions once you remove that physical element to all these interactions, right? Like, because if you make yourself abrasive or take advantage of people or situations enough times, to use a phrase my dad would say, you're gonna get your block knocked off. You know, someone's gonna take it out on you. Like you're not gonna be welcome in places if you continue to behave a certain way, and people can only take so much before the real threat of violence actually becomes a thing. And either you're going to defend yourself, which is stupid, because if you start alienating an entire community, that's not going to go well for you. And two, if you're any sane, rational human being, you're going to reevaluate your behavior and be like, maybe I'm the problem, right? Like that parable, have you heard it, Joe, where it's like, say you're like driving to work and you keep getting cut off, and it's like, wow, everyone's just an asshole. And it's like, well, maybe the common denominator in that solution or in that equation is you, and you're actually the asshole, not
right. Yes, you can be the common denominator. And if everything
right.
down around you probably are. You're doing something wrong. But we've created a world in which you never have to confront that, because the moment things start to get a little uncomfortable, you can leave.
Wrap yourself in a safety blanket. Eject yourself.
Yeah. Go to a new Reddit, a subreddit. Go to a new subreddit. Fuck off. Get a new date on Tinder.
Right?
Whatever. You name it.
So
now,
does Chantal Delsol give any like antidotes to this? Just out of curiosity.
Say that again.
Does she give any like antidotes to this? Like what should we be doing to like
She does. I didn't actually go that far. I was more interested when I was rereading this portion to get my thoughts straight. I was more interested in the technocracy thing, the idea that we've replaced all of our statesmen with scientists, and really there's something like engineers that just come in to fix a problem and then piss off. But she does have
I only say that as to juxtapose because we're just kind of laying out a bunch of negatives that we're
I know. I'm trying to think of something positive here. She goes on about vigilance in the last chapter. I don't know if I can pull up something in a timely manner about.
It's okay. I'm sure we could always revisit it at some point.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to pull up. I probably should have thought of that. Well, I'm learning as we go.
It's all good.
Try to end on a positive note every time I do this, but
yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I would lean into like a stoic view of this in some sense, right? Like or like almost a Petersonian view of it, right? Like you would pick something and aim to make the most positive impact. Like, right, if you do studies or research on people, like what do people like find value or meaning in their own life as like young people, and it's always providing an impact to something in the world, right? But it ends up being like an outsized impact, which is not to say it's possible, but it's that young people don't have the skill set to make a large impact yet, right? And so it's to me, the aim is that you should choose to try to solve problems that are within your relative skill set. Not too easy, but maybe a little bit harder, and you're not sure you can do it, but you think you can see how to do it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we kind of missed the mark. Or the other part of this is learning how to do like tangible skills, because I think a lot of the skills that are you can get a job in nowadays, like you said, with the technocracy kind of thing, is it's a lot of jobs that are kind of busy work, that they seem like technical things, and they sound like you're doing really important stuff, but at the end of the day they're kind of just like hollow administrative gopher, right? Like you're not really doing something actually productive. And so this is a very new thought for me, but it's learning something that provides you a tangible skill that produces something in the real world in some form. Because I think the closer that you are to something that you can touch with your hands, the the more invaluable you will be as things continue to digitize. Because I think we're losing something by
So,
over digitizing things.
yeah, we're losing a bit of the concrete, practical stuff.
Yeah, and it kind
Like,
of scares me honestly right now. Like as someone who went into hardware first for engineering, it's like people don't really like people look at it almost down at it, like ooh, it's like you're getting your hands dirty kind of stuff. And I'm like, that is how this all started. We're like, we need people to be able to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty.
it's easier to be a charlatan
Yeah,
in the abstract world, that you can even fool yourself into believing that you're making a difference when you're not doing. You're just, it's intellectual masturbation.
yeah,
So there's something about the real world that grounds you, you know, to be in something that can knock you upside the head when you really fuck it up.
yes. That's okay. That was the word. That was what I was thinking. It's like a ground. Like you need something that anchors you in the real world, because as things digitize, what you can do is you can lose your footing and you can start becoming untethered and you're like floating off into space, right? Like you need something that's gonna like bring you back to reality, instead of like you get so stuck on an idea or so stuck on some um ideal, right? Not even idea, like something that's like, yeah, like a utopian ideal, right? Um and just to use an example, I remember when I was in school, we had to do this project, and it was all about programming a microcomputer to be able to just do simple programs, like turning off lights in a sequence, or just kind of doing simple programming things, but it was all tied to like controlling hardware. But then the senior design project was our teacher basically said, "Okay, guys, we've done 14 weeks of classes, and now you got to just make a final project. I don't care what it is. Be creative. You can go as complex or as easy as you want. You just have to make something that's you're controlling some sort of hardware as your final project. You got 2 weeks to figure it out and do it. Have fun." And it was really fun because I was already interested in robotics at the time, and we just bought a whole bunch of like basically RC car parts to be able to create a 3-part robotic arm. And it
Okay.
ended up being super lightweight, but it was 3 joints. So it had like a shoulder, an elbow, and a wrist, and then the wrist was just like a gripper that could open and close and then rotate 180 degrees. But here's the cool thing, right? Like it sounds simple and you can kind of ideate, right? Like each joint is just a rotational thing. So you just have 0 to 180 degrees or however you would program it. Programming aside, the cool thing about it was that you learn in real time by actually trying to implement this in real life, because you could draw this on paper, but you never actually understand the complications that arise once you bring your idea into the real world.
Mm.
And we had to basically do adjustments on the fly that we would never have guessed. One of which being is that the arm itself was too heavy, so it couldn't lift itself back up, even though we used like lightweight doll rods and stuff that are lightweight to us, but just not taking into account how strong the motors we use were. So we had to basically come up with on the fly just to get it to work, because we had only 2 weeks to get it done. We had to drill the screw in the back, and we had leftover springs that we just kind of stretched to the corners to basically give a counterweight. We did no math for this. Like it wasn't like we were gonna do any sort of like counterbalancing to figure out the weight of it and blah blah blah, like we could have done. But we were just trying to get a prototype working. And so this is what I used as like an example of like when the rubber meets the road. It's like having the idea is just step one, and then getting something to work in reality is a whole other thing entirely. And so when I see people making criticisms online of like, oh, well, why can't they just fix it? It should be so easy. That to me speaks to someone who's never actually tried to create something in the real world. Because when you actually try to do something, it sounds easy when you start, but it's when you actually start trying to implement those things that you realize how much work it actually is to make it real.
Yeah. There's this idea in the military called commander's intent. And so what you do when you're going to have a mission is you sit down and you go over every detail. You plan every single little piece of that operation, everything you can imagine, where you're going to step, what the room looks like, what this, you practice it, you do like, here are the goals, here are the sub goals, here's the things we need to hit, here's all that. But the mission is organized under the commander's intent. And it's sort of the overarching value of the mission. What is it that we need to accomplish here? What's the spirit of this mission? Why do we need to get after this thing, right? And the reason for that is because the moment boots touch the ground and this thing begins, your plan is screwed. The plan never survives reality. It never survives reality. Once the chaos begins, the whole damn thing gets blown apart. But you've memorized the plan so well, and you understand the intent, so that when the ground shifts beneath you, you can adapt to it, keep your target in mind, and continue to move around the obstacles that are coming in your way that you didn't see coming, hit what goals you can on the way, and make your way to the overarching goal here, right? It's taking into account the fact that reality is a motherfucker and all the time. And you have to be willing to adapt. Right? Adapt and overcome. That's another Marine Corps.
Right. I mean, it reminds me. As soon as you started talking about that, I was thinking the no plan survives the first contact with the enemy is the quote you hear from the military a ton.
Right. Never. And
yeah, I totally
it's the same thing. When I need to change out my brakes on my car, I'm like, this will take 30 minutes. And then I go in there and the rotor is freaking like rusted onto the car and a sledgehammer isn't getting it off. You're like, oh shit. Well, there goes the half an hour time mark. Let me go find a special tool for this thing. It's like, that's the way that it goes. Reality can be a dick.
Yep. I think honestly, what we really need to do is, instead of companies creating these walled gardens, Apple, I'm looking at you, where we basically turn our products into gray boxes. I personally think that almost everybody should have the right to repair, which means that you should make a product and allow third parties to be able to keep your product running for longer if they so choose. Because not only does that, one, reduce possible e-waste as we continue to create more and more products, it makes it less likely that people need to upgrade because they can keep existing products running. And two, it creates a thriving tinkerer's ecosystem that allows people to create real tangible hands-on skills to understand how the technological society we've built continues to function, and provides a gateway for people that are younger who don't have the specialized knowledge to be able to get into these industries. Because right now there's just so much, like, it's so hard to get into these top places. Like, you already have to be proven that you know what the hell you're doing to get into the best places in the world.
Yeah.
And how do you do that if you're 20 years old and you have no skills? Like, how do you prove that you've run like a successful production run product in this world? You don't. And then you become some online admin and you send emails 40 hours a week.
Plus, it's sort of like the idea that you don't the idea that you don't have the right to repair your own shit is abysmal.
Yes.
I mean, Tesla was doing this for a minute there, where you could only take your Tesla to a
certified Tesla dealer.
Yeah, to get it repaired, which is a kind of a form of monopoly in its own way, its own little ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But also, it's like, what does ownership mean then?
Right.
If I can't repair this thing myself, what is ownership? Like, stop, respect me as a human being, as a customer, and understand that that I should have the right to own the thing that I own. I paid for this. We made an agreement. Don't back out after I've gotten a hold of it. Like, this is silly. And it's like, so that's one part of it. But then the other part of it is like, if you've created, for example, a MacBook that nobody can repair, you can't even open the damn thing, and that you can't bring it to a place for them to repair, and you can't play with it in the way that a PC you can, which is a big benefit of a PC. You're actually decreasing. You're kind of, how do you say? It's not raising the ceiling exactly. It's more like you could raise the floor if you let people repair things, because they're stuck on this thing where they're at. But the moment that you can go in and start to play with this thing and repair it myself, I've been given an incentive to learn computers, to learn hardware, to understand these facets of our very quickly developing society and become a master of my little world, my terrain, this new digital terrain. But you're denying me the chance to understand our world better at a time when it would be very good if people understood these technologies better.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've built 3 computers from the ground up, and by actually doing that, 2 of our other friends have built computers themselves too.
And if I ever get a real job,
I mean, but here, that's the thing, right? Like, that's how this community thing fosters, right? Like, all of a sudden, once one person takes a step into the unknown, they're able to bestow this unknown knowledge, right? Like, I can't go to my parents and be like, "How do I build a computer, mom and dad?" They're gonna look at me like I'm insane.
but that can be, if we play our cards right as a society, what you do with your son.
Yeah.
Like, your son wants to get into gaming, and you're like, okay, we're going to build a computer together. We're going to build a gaming computer together. Right.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's more than just going and buying a console and somehow it just works and
yeah,
whatever.
you press the power button and
you
goes.
take it for granted, right?
Yeah.
Because now it's just a commodity that you purchase at a store and has no real connection to your effort, to your labor, to your understanding. You're sort of alienated from the thing. Instead, you get to work on it and build this thing, and it becomes personal to you, and you understand it better. But it's also a moment between like father and son, so it's an emotional connection, and then you have this cool thing, right? So it's more valuable to build the damn thing, even if you have to put in the effort, than to go buy it. But if you're building a bunch of products that you're not allowed to build yourself or to repair or to work on at all, you're denying people that.
Yeah. I have another story that's related to this. Is when I got my first car. It was a 98 Toyota Corolla. I drove it off the lot for $3,000. The thing had 2 broken struts in the rear. 2 of the door handles were broken and didn't work. The rear view mirror didn't work or was cracked or something. I forget exactly what it was. But basically, this car was as close to a fucking beater as it could. But it was $3,000 and it had like 50,000 miles. It was great. Perfect first car. But luckily, I had an uncle who knows how to fix cars. But I had to go to the junkyard to see if we could find another version of my car that was in relatively good shape to scavenge parts. So door handles, rear view mirrors, basically anything that was like superficial that was easily enough to take off the car and replace ourselves, so we didn't have to go buy it. We did it because it's, spent, I don't even know, probably like less than $50 for all the parts we scavenged. And then I was there the whole time with my uncle. We replaced all the brakes, replaced all of the struts that were broken. Basically, anything we could fix ourselves, we did. And that car lasted me probably 4 or 5 years before it finally crapped out. But again, I had way more appreciation for that $3,000 car than most people do for the first car that their parents buy them, because I knew how that car worked. Like, I got to figure out how the door mechanism worked because the latch mechanism inside the door wasn't working. And so I figured out how to actually correct it without buying a new one. Because I like one of the tabs was bent or something in a weird way because someone yanked on the handle too hard. And so I literally remember sitting outside and freezing my ass off trying to figure out how to make that door latch work. Like, just these little quirks of this vehicle that you just end up taking for granted that just end up paying off because you just end up appreciating. Like, I appreciate my current car so much more because I don't have to deal with these headaches, because it just works and it's magical.
And you gain an entire domain of knowledge in the process of that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you don't know anything about your car or you don't know anything about your computer, it's a black box.
Mm-hmm.
Like something just, you never enter it. It doesn't make, if something goes wrong and you're like, whoa, I don't know what I did.
Yep.
And then that's all you can do. But it's that makes you dependent on people who are going to take advantage of you. You go to a kind of a shady mechanic and they're going to be like, oh yeah, you need an air filter and you need this. Oh man.
Yep.
So,
it behooves everybody to be as knowledgeable as they can with the things they use almost every day, because
we want as a nation, our people to be competent. Why would you not want competent people? It's like we're so fixated on like economic growth in this weird way that we don't understand that it's economic growth predicated on falsehood. that it's taking advantage of ignorant people, but ignorant people don't allow for the society on which those companies exist to continue.
Yeah.
So it's an inherently temporary thing. It's a bad idea.
I mean, the funny thing is, like, I would say 90% of what I consume on the internet is people doing tech reviews, talking about the newest in the car world, the newest in the computer world, the newest in AI machine learning models and things like that. Because even though I don't interact with those things on a regular basis, at some point those things will become everyday commodities, right? Like, how many people didn't think the internet and computers were going to be a thing?
Yeah.
And now what happened? Our entire world is dictated by the computers and devices we use every day. And most of us can't even put them down.
And so it's like, it's a problem because we need a value system of some kind, or at least a value that we as a society can agree on, so that our businesses aren't creating black boxes that take advantage of their customers in a way that's clearly unsustainable in the long run, and so that we're not talking past each other incessantly, so that we're not moving in different directions and causing more problems than we would otherwise, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And we got to reconstitute. And I think that we touched on what a good option is on the last podcast. We talked about the nature of love.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that in that podcast we talk a lot about the show Cyberpunk. Watch whoever happens to be watching this. But if you're looking for a more in-depth solution to the values problem, I think we did a pretty good job talking about it there.
Yeah, I think so too. I think honestly we should pencil this down somewhere, or I don't know if John Vervaeke has a book or something we can read or watch from him, but I think he might be one of the next stops we go to in this podcast, talking about meaning.
I'd be down to talk about meaning, but John Vervaeke is a very complicated thinker.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I could sum him up in anywhere near as pretty a way
as he does.
As he does. He has the Meaning Crisis podcast.
Oh, I didn't know he had a podcast. I know he has a YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a YouTube series about the Meaning Crisis.
But yeah, or just anything on the meaning crisis or this meaning in general, or creating meaning would be, I think,
a good one.
Something we could do to push people, and maybe we should do something on Stoics since we've mentioned that one.
That'd be done.
Pretty often too. Maybe just on Marcus Aurelius's meditations, because that's not too long.
All right, let's tease that for the future. Hopefully, this was an interesting live stream and podcast for people.
Yeah, I feel like it just ends up being more and more ideas for us to continually explore and how to solve the problems we've messed ourselves up with. So I guess anyone who's watching or gotten this far, if you've got any ideas that were sparked as we were talking here, or stories to share about, community and how to foster, maybe this is too flowery, but like fostering agency, because I think that's what really this comes down to, is like helping young people feel masters of their universe, right? Like, or like not even be masters of the universe, but like feel like they can tease out the next brick in the road. Because sometimes it just feels like there's just a wall of just chaos and unknown, and there's so many different places you can go, right? Like with the beginning intro quote, there's so many things so many ways you can step, that there's nobody around you that gives you that like thing you might be interested in that seems enticing enough to give yourself the reason to go step in that direction.
Yeah.
And I think if we had people who were just sharing stories about the people that gave them that feeling that they could take on the unknown, might be a cool thing to talk about.
Yeah. Throw it in the comments below.
Yeah.
I'll read.
Trying to get better.
Excuse
Trying
me,
to
I'll
get better
read
to ask questions of the audience so that we could try and get people to engage.
Yeah, or even to bring up something that they think would be interesting to talk about. You know,
Yeah,
for these live streams.
There's so many books that we haven't got approached by or been heard through other means. So the more the merrier, as always.
Yeah. And I threw up a new article on the website, feedingcuriosity.com, about another archetypes article on the bowl, the meaning symbolically of the bowl, which is a very old one. There's also the Ouroboros article that we put up a while ago, and those are both available if you'd like.
Yep. So if you're interested in how Joe selects topics or ideas within the philosophical realm, that's definitely for you. Alrighty. So with that, we'll see everybody next week.